Again, we're live at the Restoring Excellence in Education Forum at St. Cloud State. Thanks to, of course, the Kerns for bringing us up here. This is the first of what we hope to be several Restoring Excellence in Education Forums here at St. Cloud State. It's an excellent event so far. A lot of interesting stuff going on here. And a good part of that is, of course, our next guest, RiShawn Biddle, best known as the one of the editors of Dropout Nation, as well as a writer for the American Spectator, where many of you may be familiar from him, since virtually everyone involved in Salem communications, except me, seems to write for the American Spectator these days.
Well, I don't write for the American Spectator.
Oh, I thought you did.
No, I've never written for the American
Hard time
Spectator.
keeping track of who writes for who around you. Now, you write for what? Where are you at?
Well, Hot Air,
Town Hall, The Week, NRO.
The Fiscal Times. No, I don't do anything for NRO.
I did NRO.
Nope.
RiShawn Biddle, you do write for the Weekly Standard. Welcome to the broadcast here today.
Well, hey,
Now that we've got the scorecard figured out.
We've got you figured out at least. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you very much.
That's right. So you're here to talk about. Your actual presentation relates to parental involvement. Of course, it's a hot topic for me for reasons I've gone into on the broadcast here before. But one of the things I think that most annoys me about one of the mantras you hear from defenders of the status quo in public school is they say, if only parents were more involved, things would be a whole lot easier. And of course, people who say that don't know the degree, I think, to which public schools like to limit parents' involvement. They like it if you want to help stuff envelopes, but if you get too noisy about the kind of education your kids are getting, you're sort of persona non grata, RiShawn.
Oh, yes, that's without question. I mean, I make this point all the time. When it comes down to families, American public education, folks like to either have parents as doing field trips,
chaperoning,
homework, putting some money into the PTA. But when it really comes down to actual and I hate the word parent involvement, because
right.
the word every parent I know is involved.
Yeah.
You will look at your kid's homework. Well, yeah, done. I take my kid to school. Well, that's involvement. But we're talking about actual ability to make decisions and to shape the quality of education that your kid receives. Well, guess what? We really do a bad job of it. We make sure that parents don't involve. We schedule parent-teacher conferences at times in the week and times in the year when, in all due honesty, no parent, in a day and age when parents are working, both parents are working, it just doesn't work. And we're talking about for middle-class families.
Right.
And then when you actually look further into things such as report cards, why are we telling about report cards at a point in time? You're telling them 3 months into the school year, when at that point you really can't do anything about what's going on with your kid. And so now you're stuck, trying to figure out what to do. And honestly, this is communication that you have wanted and asked for since day one.
Yeah, that's the thing about the report card system that used to drive me nuts. Really, the only role that I had as a parent, having had two kids go all the way through the system, was as the heavy. Okay, for the last 3 months, you haven't been doing your work. Let's undo 3 months worth of damage. And yeah, that's my involvement. I get to be the bad guy every single time. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm fine being the bad guy. But
I was going to say you're uniquely qualified to be the bad guy.
Yeah, I know. That's what they tell me as well here. But why is this, RiShawn Biddle? Why? I know my father was a teacher for 40 years. My grandparents were teachers. My little sister teaches. I've taught community college. Parents tend to want to be involved. Why are the public schools the way they are?
Well, what we've had here for years is a system. I go back to my grandmother's day, back in the Great Depression.
Right.
Well, my great-grandparents could barely read.
Right.
They could barely get above signing X's. And so my grandmother wasn't capable of reading until she managed to get a teacher. She got lucky.
Right.
A teacher in 4th grade that actually got her up to grade level and above. Today, and back then that was understandable. Back then, the system it didn't really work then. It doesn't work now. But back then, it didn't matter. You didn't graduate, well, you got a job anyway. You were able to, between 1940 and 1980, you were able to get, in fact, not only have a job, but have a middle-class job where you could retire in Florida with a boat You go to Michigan, go any part of Michigan, you meet some of these folks who've had that life and didn't graduate from high school at all.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is today, even you were talking. I remember, talking about jobs, and for whether you go to traditional college, whether you go into a trade job, into technical college, or technical school, or you even go into an area like apprenticeships, you need strong math, science, and reading skills to do well. And yet we have a system that has all but essentially, basically, it's basically a Model T Ford system. Doesn't work.
Is part of that, though, because we've been transitioning from a manufacturing economy to a service-based economy where those skills are needed at a much lower level than they used to be? You go to a plant, a manufacturing plant, and as a welder, you can make really good money, but you don't have to have, necessarily high levels of math and reading skills. You just have to know how to weld. And the math skills were for the accountants and the managers. But like you said, you could get a good job, a very good paying job, one that could get you the boat and the retirement. But as you move out of that manufacturing economy to a service-based economy, you really need those skills all up and down throughout the company structure, right?
Yeah, and it's more than that, because actually, if you actually talk to a welder, one of the things that welders need is the ability to do trigonometry.
Right.
Well, that's a good point, yes.
Trigonometry is a very it's not the most complex of all mathematics, but when I was in high school, that was not.
It was daunting. Yeah.
It was a daunting subject.
Yes, it was.
With a capital D, which is about where I came in. Yeah.
And I did fairly well on the SAT. So on the math portion. So this was fairly daunting. And even now, if you look at skills such as elevator installation and machine tool and die, those jobs, those jobs are coming back. We actually now have a generation of folks who are retiring, who are baby boomers, who are basically heading off into the sunset, and we have those jobs open, and yet we don't have people who can fill them. And especially now, when those jobs have themselves become knowledge-based jobs.
And so, this is sort of getting around to my point, is we talk a lot about having to have a well-educated population in order to have economic growth. And that's the reason why you hear, well, we got to throw more money into education, because of what you're talking about. Because even these jobs that didn't used to have a whole lot of formal education outside of just the education of the trade itself, now requires a fairly broad education, and a fairly successfully broad education, in order to successfully accomplish these things. So why shouldn't we just keep throwing more money at the education system?
Because throwing money in and of itself, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not necessarily for cutting, and then I'm not necessarily for increasing. My whole view is we have $591 billion with a capital B in the system. We've spent, it's quadrupled since the 1960s. Right. And guess what? With that kind of money, we spend it badly. The problem is, and I make this point when people talk about the criminal justice system, we say we spend a whole bunch of money on prisons. My response is, one, we don't spend a whole lot of money on prisons. We spend a lot of money on criminal justice, $200 billion. But the reason why we spend $200 billion badly on criminal justice is because we spend $591 billion on education abysmally. And same with welfare and everything else. And the thing is, for example, we spend $7 billion a year on helping teachers gain raises for adding a master's degree. Now, all the research has shown that there is no correlation between having a master's degree and improving student achievement. We spend billions of dollars a year on training on the K-12 teacher training system. We do it badly. We bring in teachers. Let's put it this way. We have a lot of teachers, wonderful people, who, for no fault of their own, probably got into education, and they really weren't made for doing this job. It's a complex, difficult job when you really think about what you're doing. And unfortunately, they're in this job, and we're paying them a lot of money, and it's because we've spent a lot of money badly on bringing in people into ed schools, and then We brought the wrong people in, and then we trained them even worse. And so now that's billions of dollars down the drain.
Yeah. And the educational academy is getting even worse as we go. I mean, it's getting worse, not better. Can we keep you for another segment, RiShawn?
Right,
That'd be great, because I've got a number of very big. Let's
Same
take a break right now. We're the Northern Alliance Radio Network live at the Restoring Excellence in Education Symposium at St. Cloud State at Brown Hall. You got plenty of time to stop by. We'd love to have you here. You got questions for RiShawn Biddle? Give us a call, 651-289-4488. Go nowhere. We'll be right back.
Look at me, I'm falling off a cliff now. You still hear my mama yell.
Score. Gotta love it. Yeah.
Hello?
How are those New Year's resolutions coming?
Well, I'm eating cake, so...
How about a new resolution? To save.
Announcing big savings at the Sears MLK event, like up to 25% off all Kenmore appliances. Plus, save an extra 10% off all appliance brands, $4.99 and up with your Sears card.
Now this is a resolution I can do.
You're still eating cake, aren't you?
No.
Think you know how to save? Think again. Sears, #1 in appliances. Exclusions apply. See store for details. Kenmore savings range from 5 to 25%. Offer valid 1/13 through 1/17.
Do you have a family member who's getting older and can no longer be safely left alone? Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care, assists senior citizens and adults to continue living at home and not have to move into a nursing home. Visiting Angels has over 400 franchised locations across the nation. Experienced, compassionate caregivers provide assistance in hygiene, meal preparation, and light housework up to 24 hours a day. Rates are affordable, and you can select your caregiver before service begins. Visiting Angels has cared for hundreds of thousands of seniors nationwide. Franchises are available. Call Visiting Angels toll-free today at 877-374-LIVE. To find an office near you, visit www.visitingangels.com. For home care for your loved ones, call Visiting Angels now at 877-374-LIVE. That's Visiting Angels, America's choice in home care at 877-374-LIVE.
When winter arrives early, it's kind of like uninvited dinner guests. You're just not ready. So how about you? Are you ready for another Minnesota winter? More importantly, is your boiler ready? Hi, it's Maggie again for Benjamin Franklin Plumbing with an offer to help you and your boiler get ready for winter during Benjamin Franklin Plumbing's boiler tune-up sale. Don't you spend another winter hoping your boiler will do its job. Play it safe and prevent costly emergency repairs during Benny's Boiler Tune-Up Sale. Call now and you'll save $30 off their regular price tune-up. And remember, Benny and the boys are the punctual plumbers. They arrive on time or pay you $5 for every minute they're late. Call them for all your plumbing needs, from boilers and water heaters to filtered drinking water, softeners, and faucet. Whatever you need, Benjamin Franklin Plumbing has got you covered. Call them today.
8675309. 8675309.
Congratulations on landing the job. I'm really excited for you.
Thanks. How's your search going?
The job market's tight. I mean, I can barely get an interview, and I've got student loans to deal with. You're lucky, you know? The National Guard paid your loans off.
Luck. The Guard was a smart decision, one you can still make.
The National Guard Student Loan Repayment Program can pay up to $50,000 of your existing student loans. Get the details at nationalguard.com.
Sponsored by the Minnesota National Guard, aired by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association and this station.
AM 1280 The Patriot, Northern Alliance Radio Network, live from the Restoring Excellence in Education Forum, live from the campus of St. Cloud State University. Our thanks to the Kerns up here who made a good chunk of this broadcast possible. We'll be talking with one or another, perhaps both of the Kerns later on in the broadcast here today. They are the dynamos that basically got this whole thing off the ground, and we'll likely do it again here with any luck and a good tailwind. But right now we're talking with RiShawn Biddle, one of the co-authors of Dropout Nation, co-editors, I should say, of Dropout Nation, also writes for the American Spectator, among many others. And RiShawn, we're talking about your main subject here today is parental choice. And of course, I live in St. Paul, a city that, in the capital city of Minnesota, a state that prides itself on education and yet has the greatest achievement gap, among the greatest achievement gaps of any urban school system in the United States, and a city that has lost 1/8 of its parents to suburban school choice open enrollment, and in my case, to the charter schools. I pulled my kids up because, frankly, what they did with my son deserves a lawsuit if I had $50,000. laws because, of course, the teachers wrote the laws as well. But so a lot of us are exercising choice in Minnesota with our feet. We're getting our kids out of the public school systems. Yeah. It's even worse in Minneapolis, or better if you're an advocate of school choice, either way. But different states have different approaches to this. But I think you're seeing you're seeing a lot of cracks in the system here. I mean, Americans have always had this, I think, naive faith in our public school system, but you're seeing this avalanche of parents who've just said, I've had enough, I can't take this anymore, my kids deserve better, especially in St. Paul, where 80% of the charter school parents are African-American, Latino, or Hmong. It's the extent to which we, the parents, are being badly served would nauseate people who come from some of the less dysfunctional parts of this country's education system, RiShawn Biddle.
Well, I would argue that it's hard to find a less dysfunctional system.
Yeah.
I mean, I think here's the thing. I mean, if you go, the point, to give you a good example of this, there's a place in Southern California, right in San Bernardino County, and there's an elementary school called Desert Trail Elementary. It is one of the worst performing schools in the state of California, and
that takes some doing, by the way.
Yeah, it takes a lot of doing. I mean, it takes a lot. And what you now have is the parents are trying to force the district to hand over control of the school. They're using a law called the parent trigger. Essentially, is you get a majority of parents. They get together, they petition for either to remove the school leadership, remove the teachers, or even remove the district and just get them out of the business of running that school, and maybe put a charter school operator, maybe even start their own, school council. And right now, we already know this is the second major battle over this in the state of California. And then you got, I mean, what's happening is parents realize that we need a revolution, not an evolution, in American public education.
And RiShawn, I mean, the issue here is that used to be the model anyway. That used to be the model for public education, is that you had a local school board that ran the schools that were primarily run by parents and people in the community. More or less that was the model. The issue, how big of an issue are the federal and state mandates that sort of lock these schools out of, or lock the parents out of being able to significantly impact the way that these schools are run?
Well, I would argue that in many ways it's sort of an interesting story, because if we start looking through history, the history of education has always been less about, I would say, less of a myth of there's been a myth of local control. But if you look at history, the first public education systems in this country were, including in Massachusetts, the idea of education was not about education or learning how to have a set of skills. It was essentially two purposes. One, to have a sort of a state religion. Essentially, we're a civic religion where, we have a certain set of American, quote, American values. Good or bad, that's what it was. And the second purpose was we didn't want Catholic school kids going to Catholic school. And it didn't work on the second. It didn't really work on the second front. For a long time, the Catholic school system was the second school system in the United States. And it really hasn't worked on the first for a lot of reasons. And part of it, here's the thing. We talk about local control, and I go, the truth is, in many ways, it's a mixed picture. When you look at the federal government, and when people talk about No Child Left Behind, the reality is No Child didn't really add new federal mandates. What it did was essentially finally admitted something. States create these school systems, they create these school districts, and guess what, states? You need to actually, here's the thing, we're putting all this money in, $591 billion. Right. Well, what are you getting for it? And we're finally starting to get some answers. The answer is, well, not very much. We sort of knew it back in 1982 when A Nation at Risk came out. We're now today we're thanks to data, and this is where the role of the feds actually has worked out. We can argue the federal role as federal government in a whole lot of other areas Yeah, problem. Let's be real. We'll leave it at that. But in education, actually, for the first time in history, it's been the feds have actually said, listen, well, what are you actually doing? And forced states to actually start asking some questions of school districts, because for a long time the districts they got money, they did what they wanted, and no one bothered to ask the question, what are you getting for the dollar? So it's more of a mixed story than just, it's the Fed, it's the poor districts and they're being shackled by the feds. Well, the districts weren't doing very well by the parents anyway.
Well, and that's certainly true in places like Los Angeles, and places like Chicago, New York. Certainly a lot of problems in those districts. Was it also true though? Because there's also, I think, maybe a myth that the suburban school districts were doing it so much better than the LAUSDs and the NYUSDs and that sort of thing.
And for those of you listening by radio, he shook the look on his face was like he just bitten into a lemon there. Just do a little play-by-play.
It's like I just served him lutefisk. Hey, and those of you in Minnesota will know exactly what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about too. But yeah, the answer is suburban districts. The reality is in some ways, we really don't know how well we've done with education, largely because we've never bothered tracking it for most of history.
Right.
In many cases, we're guessing. We guess we had a high graduation rate back in maybe the 1950s. The truth of the matter is, we didn't have good data back in the 1950s to tell the difference.
And we were coming from a society where the average education had been 8th grade up through World War II, so anything was an improvement.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. So honestly, in many ways, probably suburban districts weren't necessary. It's likely that suburban districts were not doing any better back then. I can actually tell you, there's a book called Blue Chip Black, and it's a book about the experience of African Americans and in suburban area of Washington D.C. And in what was happening was you had parents who moved in from the big bad D.C. school system, which was big and bad and still many ways still is. And they moved to Montgomery County. They moved to Prince George's County. They moved to Alexandria, Virginia, where I'm at. They moved to Fairfax County, and what they found out was, guess what? It's still pretty bad, and it's a little better. It's a little nicer. The buildings are fantastic. Your kids may not. Your kids will be, in theory, safer. In theory, doesn't depending on how willing they are to report what's actually happening.
Right.
But your kids weren't necessarily getting better served. And if you look at the fact that in the United States, we're talking about 28% of the kids who are 4th graders are functionally illiterate, and this includes 1/5 of all suburban kids coming from middle-class households. And you look in Minnesota, it's the same numbers in suburbia. The reality is, American public education has not done such a great job by all of its students, regardless of where they come from.
So is there any way forward? First of all, is there any place where the lessons are being learned and assimilated and actually turned around into some useful improvements for RiShawn Biddle?
I would say, you look in New York City where we've actually seen some improvements. And it's the first step. Here's the thing: it's taken a lot of years to get here. Unfortunately, the problem is we're not going to get out of here any of these issues anytime soon, and it might get worse than better. Part of it being is that you're arguing with folks, and folks who have had who have been fighting for, have enjoyed the system as it is for a very long time. But in New York City, for example, we've seen improvements. Actually, we have black students who are reading at a grade and a half level higher than they were back in 2002, and this is 9 years. So there's some districts and some cities that are actually improving. You have places like Arlington, Virginia, which students are improving, and they've significantly narrowed the achievement gap between black and white students, and actually improved in all areas. But again, you've got to work hard at this. This is tough work, and it means a lot of parents are really going to have to do a lot more and demand a lot more in order to see better.
And of course, that's one of the problems I've found, that the half-life of a parental education activist is, about 12 years, because no matter how long you stick in the system, eventually they graduate or drop out or do something. It's like, on to the rest of my life here. I've got to hit that myself here. Now that my youngest is 18. It is so much work. It is just a brutal amount of work, just on a parent by parent, kid by kid level, to get them through the system and get them to get an education out of the system. So it's on a systemic level. I can't even imagine how much work is involved.
RiShawn, we've got a lot of people in the chat room asking for your website information where they can follow up on the things that you're doing.
All right, great. It's dropoutnation.net, one word, and you can find it. You can find everything there, and including we do a weekly podcast. Probably the largest in education policy arena. We try to make sure it's not dry. It's always interesting, and some folks will always shake their head afterwards, but that's a good thing.
That's the fun.
And as well as my columns in the American Spectator, just look at the Spectator and you'll find me.
Talking with RiShawn Biddle, thanks for stopping by. RiShawn, we'll have to do this again sometime.
Will do.
Thank you very much. Northern Alliance Radio Network, AM 1280, The Patriot, live from Restoring Excellence in Education Symposium at St. Cloud State University. We'll be right back.